My name is Nadia Elaine Merritt. I'm 34 years old. The night my parents asked me to leave, my brother didn't look up from his phone. My mother stood at the kitchen counter with a dish towel in her hands, folding it the way she folded everything, neatly, deliberately, like she'd rehearsed the creases. My father told me that Connor needed a space to focus, that he was at a crossroads, that the basement, where my brother had lived since dropping out of college at 21, wasn't giving him enough room to grow. He needed my room, the upstairs bedroom with the window that faced the water tower, the one I'd been sleeping in since I was 7 years old. I stood in the doorway of that room and counted the things in it that belonged to me. The drafting desk I'd bought with my first paycheck, the engineering textbooks I never threw away, the framed photo from the Delmarva Bridge project, my name listed in the acknowledgments, hanging above the closet door. My father had already moved the photo to the floor, leaning face first against the baseboard. He said it wasn't a big deal. He said I was practical. He said I'd figure it out. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 2 days earlier, a certified letter had arrived at my office from a law firm in Portland, Maine. I hadn't opened it yet. I almost wish I had. Before I take you back to that night, I need a moment. If this is the kind of story you want to hear through to the end, please hit subscribe. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What time is it? And are you the person in your family who holds everything together while everyone else falls apart? I want to know. I'll read every single one. Now let me take you back to a Thursday in late October, the night it all broke. I'd driven home from the Baltimore job site still in my work boots, 43 minutes up I-95, through the merge at Route 32, past the Sunoco station where the left pump has been broken since 2019. My parents' house is on Caldwell Road in Harrow Falls, Maryland. 2-story colonial with green shutters, a flagstone path, and a mailbox I'd replaced twice. The mortgage on that house had been in my father's name until it wasn't. Until the refinance in 2017, when his credit score had cratered after the second round of layoffs from the distribution center. I'd co-signed without being asked. I hadn't thought twice. That's the part I want you to understand. It wasn't resentment at the time. It was just what I did. When I pulled in that Thursday, there were 2 cars I didn't expect. My Aunt Barbara's white Camry and my parents' neighbor, Ted Polson, whose gray pickup I recognized from the driveway across the street. 4 people inside. 4 witnesses. The porch light was on. Through the window, I could see the television running on the news channel my father always had at too high a volume. I walked in through the side door the way I always did. My mother was at the kitchen island with a cup of tea. Aunt Barbara sat across from her on a bar stool. Ted Polson was in the living room in the armchair we never used, holding a beer from the 6-pack he always brought when he stopped by unannounced. My brother Connor was on the couch in sweatpants, laptop open, headphones around his neck. He was 28 years old. He had not held a full-time job in 3 years. He had not paid a bill in longer than that. Nobody said hello. What they said was this. Connor looked up. "Oh, good, you're home." My mother turned from the counter. "Nadia, come sit. We've been talking." And I knew. The way you know when you walk into a room and the temperature is wrong. The way you know when people stop their conversation right at the moment you enter. I knew before a single specific word. I sat. My mother folded her hands. She always folded her hands before she said something she'd already decided. Connor needs more space than the basement. He's been dealing with a lot. You're barely here. With the job sites, you're gone half the week anyway. My room. It makes more sense. I looked at Connor. He picked up his phone. I looked at my father, Frank Merritt. He was standing at the edge of the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed, staring at a point somewhere between me and the refrigerator. Frank Merritt had worked in logistics management for 27 years. He was a methodical man, a man who read instruction manuals before assembling furniture. When he finally made eye contact, it lasted exactly 1 second. "Nadia, it's practical," he said. "You'll find something closer to the job sites. It'll probably be easier on your commute." Aunt Barbara had gone very still on her bar stool. She was looking at the tile grout. Ted Poulsen took a long drink from his beer. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed in a direction that might be mistaken for objection. "So I'm being asked to leave. Tonight." Not tonight, necessarily. Connor's things have been up there since Tuesday, actually. My mother kept her voice smooth. "We thought you'd want a few days to sort things." Since Tuesday. I drove to 3 job sites between Monday and Thursday. I'd slept in a Fairfield Inn in Easton on Wednesday because the Thursday morning inspection started at 6. And while I was doing that, my family had already relocated my brother into my bedroom. Since Tuesday. I looked at the kitchen counter. There was a styrofoam container from the Chinese place on Birch Street. Dinner for 4. Nobody had called to ask if I was eating. Let me take you back further, because that kitchen didn't build itself overnight. I graduated from the University of Maryland's Civil Engineering program at 22. I was the first person in the Merritt family to finish a 4-year degree. My great-uncle Theodore, my grandfather's younger brother, sent me a card that arrived 3 days after the ceremony. He was a marine biologist, a reclusive man who'd spent most of his adult life on or near the water. I'd only met him twice in person, but he wrote in small, careful print, "Nadia, you have discipline in your spine. That will outlast everything else." I kept that card in the back of my planner for years. My starting salary at Halloran Engineering Group was $58,000. I was 23. I bought a used Subaru for $11,400, opened a Roth IRA, and set a budget that left me $400 a month for savings after rent and food. 3 months in, my mother called to tell me the water heater had failed, and the replacement quote was $1,800. I sent $1,800, not a loan. She didn't frame it as a loan, and I didn't ask her to. I just sent it. That was the first one. By the time I was 26, the monthly transfers to my parents' account had settled into a rhythm. $1,200 a month, direct deposit, set on automatic the same day I set up my own rent payment. It covered the difference between my father's salary and what the mortgage actually required after the refinance. It also absorbed the electric bill in winter, which ran high because nobody in that house turned off a light when they left a room. I didn't say anything about the lights. Connor was 20. He'd enrolled in community college for 1 semester, taken 2 classes, and withdrawn before the drop deadline expired. After that, he picked up shift work at a sporting goods warehouse. He lasted 4 months. Then he worked at a car wash, then a gym. Then he stopped working entirely for what my mother described as a rough patch. The rough patch was still going when I was 34. My father's company was absorbed in a merger in 2019. He was kept on in a reduced capacity, part-time, no benefits. The health insurance gap cost him $620 a month for his and my mother's combined plan. I picked it up at 28, added it to the auto-pay schedule like a line item, like a utility. $620. It was less than my own gym membership was expensive. I told myself that. At 30, Connor needed a car. Not a new car, a used one. A 2015 Honda Civic with 74,000 miles that a dealer on Route 40 was selling for $9,300. My mother called me on a Sunday morning while I was reviewing specs for a bridge deck overlay project. She said Connor was looking at something affordable. She said she just needed me to look at the numbers. I said I'd look. Looking turned into a conversation. The conversation turned into my mother saying, "It's only $9,300, Nadia. You make good money." I transferred $9,300 that afternoon. My name was not on the title. Connor thanked me with a thumbs-up emoji. I ran the total once in a spreadsheet, just once, just to see it clearly. From age 23 to 34, monthly transfers, the insurance, the water heater, 2 appliance replacements, the down payment on the car, a medical bill my father incurred the year his hip required a cortisone series, and the co-signed mortgage. The total came to $312,000. I closed the spreadsheet. I didn't save it. I didn't need to look at the number more than once. I already knew it the way you know the weight of something you've been carrying so long it registers as normal. Here is what that $312,000 bought me in return. In 2021, I submitted a portfolio for a project lead position on a regional infrastructure contract worth $4.3 million. My company promoted an external candidate. 3 people in the office congratulated me for taking it well. My mother's response when I told her was, "You'll get it next time." She said it before I finished the sentence. She'd already moved on to asking if I could pick up Connor's car insurance for 1 more month because he was between checks. I said yes. That was the last time I said yes. In the spring before the eviction, I'd begun building something quietly. I want to explain how quietly. The way you do things in the margins of a life that doesn't ask you questions. I'd been doing weekend consulting work for 2 years, nights and weekends, small municipalities and private developers who needed third-party structural assessments. Reports, site evaluations, load calculations, feasibility analyses. I'd built a client list of 11. I'd formed a single-member LLC called Meridian Structural Consulting, registered in Maryland, and opened a dedicated business account. My first year revenue was $41,000. My second was $87,500. I didn't tell anyone in my family. Not because I was hiding it, because nobody ever asked what I did after work. My mother never asked about my projects. My father never asked if I was tired. Connor never asked me anything that wasn't a precursor to a dollar amount. And so, Meridian grew in silence, the way competence grows when nobody expects anything from you except a number in their bank account. I had plans. Let me tell you about the plans, because they matter for what comes later. By the following spring, Meridian was on track to exceed $120,000 in annual revenue. I was planning to leave Halloran and take Meridian full-time. I was also planning, before I left Maryland, to pay off the remaining $47,000 on my parents' mortgage. All of it. A final payment, a clean ledger, and then I would leave for good. I'd even drafted a letter I was going to leave with the check. It said, "The house is yours now. No debt. Take care of each other. I love you." That letter lived in a folder on my laptop labeled simply, "Before I go." I never sent it. My father packed my things first. Let me take you back to the kitchen, back to Thursday evening. After my mother explained the arrangement, I went upstairs. My bedroom door was open. Connor's gaming setup was on my drafting desk. His clothes were folded in my dresser. He'd rearranged my bookshelf to make room for a speaker system. The framed photo from the Delmarva project was on the floor with its face to the wall. My father came up behind me. He was already holding a collapsed cardboard box. He popped it open with his forearm the way men do when they've done something before. He set it on the bed and opened my closet. "Dad," he kept moving. "Dad, look at me." He pulled 3 of my jackets off the rod, folded them lengthwise, and laid them in the box. "I have nowhere to go tonight." "You have options." His voice wasn't cold. That was the part that undid me. It was reasonable, patient, like he was explaining a weather delay. "You can stay at a hotel tonight. We'll sort out a longer plan over the weekend." He'd thought about this. The hotel suggestion was not spontaneous. He'd workshopped that sentence before I arrived. They'd all workshopped this before I arrived. Downstairs, I could hear Connor telling Ted Polson about a video game he was playing. He laughed at something. In the kitchen, my mother ran the sink. Aunt Barbara had gone quiet. Nobody came upstairs. I looked at my father's hands setting my things into the box. Hands I'd watched fix a carburetor at 10 years old. Hands that had gripped my shoulders at my college graduation and said, "Merit women finish what they start." Those same hands, folding my jackets, putting me in a cardboard box because my 28-year-old brother needed more room to figure it out. I took the Delmarva photo off the floor. I carried the first box down the stairs past the kitchen where my mother was still running water, past the living room where Ted Polson pretended to study his beer label, past my aunt who stood halfway off her bar stool and then sat back down. I put the box in my car. I went back for the second one, and the third. On my third trip down the hallway, Connor appeared at the top of the stairs with his hands in his sweatshirt pocket. He looked at the box under my arm. "You good?" he said. I didn't answer him. I carried the last box out, closed the trunk, and sat in the driver's seat of my car in the driveway on Caldwell Road. The porch light was still on. Through the kitchen window, I could see my mother's shape moving past the refrigerator. Through the living room window, the television was still too loud. I sat there for 9 minutes. I know it was 9 because I watched the clock on the dashboard. Then I put the car in reverse and backed down the driveway for the last time. I drove 22 miles to a Super 8 motel off Route 50 in Annapolis. $78 a night. Room 114, first floor, end of the row. The bedspread was a shade of burgundy that had been washed so many times it had become something closer to gray. The heater clicked on and off every 4 minutes. I counted. I put the Delmarva photo on the nightstand because I needed something in that room to be mine. Then I noticed the certified letter. I'd brought my work bag in from the car out of habit. Inside, underneath a project binder and my laptop charger, was the envelope. It had arrived at my office 2 days earlier. I'd set it on my desk, intending to open it after the site walk. The site walk ran long. I'd forgotten about it. The return address read, Callaway and Voss, Attorneys at Law, 184 Exchange Street, Portland, Maine, 04101. The name in the upper left corner said, "In the matter of the estate of Theodore Rowan Merritt." Great-Uncle Theo had died 6 weeks earlier. My mother had called to tell me. She'd been brief about it. A stroke at 79, at his home on the Maine coast, discovered by a caretaker. She said the man had lived like a hermit. She said she didn't think there was anything left because he'd never done anything sensible with his money. She said she wasn't sure if anyone was expected to go to the service. She hadn't gone. Nobody from our branch of the family had gone. I sat on the edge of the motel bed in room 114, still in my work boots, and I opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, clean, dense paragraphs, the language of attorneys. I read the first page twice before I understood what it was saying. Theodore Rowan Merritt had died with a valid, notarized will. The will named a single primary beneficiary for the entirety of his estate. Not my father, Frank Merritt, Theodore's nephew by marriage. Not my mother, not Connor. Me, Nadia Elaine Merritt. The estate included a revocable living trust funded at $2.1 million in liquid assets and investment accounts. It included a 4.3-acre private island off the coast of Maine, approximately 6 nautical miles southeast of the town of Stonington, Deer Isle. The island had a main residence, a guest cottage, a boathouse, and a caretaker's apartment. The island's infrastructure included solar power generation, a rainwater cistern and filtration system, and a private dock capable of accommodating vessels up to 62 feet. The letter noted that Callaway and Voss had been trying to reach me by phone for 2 weeks at a number I'd changed 8 months prior. It requested that I contact the office at my earliest convenience to begin the transfer and probate process. I set the letter on my knee and looked at the burgundy gray bedspread for a long time. The heater clicked on. It clicked off. Outside, a truck downshifted on Route 50. I thought about the card Theo had sent me after graduation. Nadia, you have discipline in your spine. I thought about my mother saying, he never did anything sensible with his money. I thought about the letter I'd drafted and never sent, the one that said, the house is yours. Take care of each other. I thought about Connor's thumbs up emoji when I wired $9,300 for his car. Then I did something I hadn't done in 4 months. I cried. Not because of the island, not yet. I cried because a man who'd met me twice in my life had seen something in me worth leaving everything to. And the people I had paid $312,000 over 11 years had set my picture face down on the floor. I called Callaway and Voss the next morning at 8:47. A paralegal named Grace answered. I asked to speak with the attorney of record. His name was David Voss, the younger of the 2 partners, deliberate in his speech, the kind of lawyer who pauses before every sentence because every sentence costs someone money. He told me the timeline. He told me what the trust contained. He told me the island had been fully maintained by a live-in caretaker named Walt Kimball, 67, who'd worked for Theodore for 19 years and was, per the terms of the will, offered the option to remain in the caretaker's apartment at no cost for the remainder of his natural life. Mr. Voss, I said, is this real? A pause. Miss Merritt, Theodore Merritt was meticulous. He updated this will 4 times over the last 12 years. Your name has been in it since 2014. I was 24 years old in 2014. I was wiring $1,200 a month to my parents and eating lunch at my desk, and I didn't know I was in a dead man's will? I asked him how Theodore had decided. Mr. Voss took a breath. He told me Theodore had followed my career from a distance. Clippings, online publications, project announcements. He'd seen my name in the acknowledgments of a regional infrastructure report in 2016. He had a copy of a trade magazine profile I'd done in 2019 for a Maryland engineering publication. He'd kept a file. He'd told Mr. Voss on more than one occasion that I was the only member of the Merritt family who had ever built something with their own hands. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked when I could come to Maine. 3 weeks later, I drove north. I want to tell you about that drive because it mattered. I left Annapolis on a Saturday at 5 a.m. in November. The sky was still black until Delaware. By the time I crossed into Connecticut, the light was gray and low, and the trees along I-95 had mostly shed their leaves. Pennsylvania had been red. New England was bare. There is something about bare November trees that feels honest. No performance, just structure. Just the truth of what's holding everything up. I met David Voss in Portland at noon. We signed paperwork for 3 hours. He handed me a manila envelope with the deed, the trust documents, and a summary of the island's infrastructure. He also handed me a handwritten note Theodore had left, separate from the will, sealed with a small piece of Scotch tape. I read it in my car in the parking structure. It said, "Nadia, I built this place for quiet. I hope it gives you the same. You've earned the right to stop building things for other people. The island will take care of you if you let it. Walt knows where everything is. He makes a decent pot of chowder if you ask him. Take good care of the terns. They nest on the North Point in spring. Uncle Theo." I folded the note and put it in the same planner pocket where I'd kept his graduation card for 11 years. I drove to Stonington the following morning. I want to tell you what it looks like to arrive at something you've earned without knowing you were earning it. The dock at Stonington was quiet on a Sunday morning in late November. 6 nautical miles of cold Atlantic water between the mainland and the island. Walt Kimball met me in a 22-foot aluminum skiff, a man with white eyebrows and a red wool jacket who shook my hand with both of his and said simply, "Mr. Theodore talked about you. Welcome." The crossing took 24 minutes. The island came into view slowly, the way important things do. Low tree line first, then the dock, then the cedar-shingled roof of the main house set back from the eastern shore on a slight rise. The house was 3,400 square feet, built in 1987 and renovated in 2009. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a great room with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the open Atlantic, a kitchen with a commercial range, and a library that occupied the entire north wing. Theo had read everything. Walt tied the skiff off and walked me up the dock path. The air smelled like salt and cold pine, and something underneath both that I couldn't name for the first hour. I figure it out eventually. It was the smell of zero obligations. The total and complete absence of anyone who needed something from me. I stood on the front porch of that house and looked at the water and didn't speak for a long time. Walt stood next to me with his hands in his jacket pockets. He said, "Mr. Theodore used to stand right there most mornings." I said, "I understand why." Inside, the house was warm. Walt had run the radiant floor system since the previous afternoon in anticipation of my arrival. The great room had a stone fireplace wide enough to stand in. The furniture was worn in the specific way that good furniture gets worn. Evidence of use, not neglect. Theodore's books lined the library in 3 languages. His desk faced the northwest window. A tide chart from October was still pinned above it. I stood at his desk and put my hand flat on the surface. I didn't cry this time. I just felt the wood, the solidity of it, the heft of a man who'd built a life exactly as he'd intended. Now let me tell you what was happening in Harrow Falls while I was standing on that island. I had not spoken to my family since the night I left. I want to be precise about that. Not one call returned, not one text answered. For 21 days, I had been living in an extended stay suite in Annapolis, working remote from my consulting laptop, letting the auto-pay transfers continue while I processed the paperwork in Maine and the weight of what had happened on Caldwell Road. On day 21, I opened my banking app, went to the recurring payment screen, and sat with it for longer than I expected. 3 items. Mortgage co-payment supplement, $1,200 monthly, running 8 years. Health insurance premium, Frank and Donna Merritt, $620 monthly, running 6 years. Connor Merritt vehicle insurance, added as courtesy payment, $194 monthly, running 2 years. Total monthly, $2,014. Total life to date, $312,000. A financial consultant I'd once worked with had a phrase she used with clients who were hemorrhaging money on underperforming assets. She said, "At some point, you stop throwing good money after a bad investment. You just stop." I thought about the styrofoam container on the kitchen counter the night I came home. Dinner for 4. No one had called to ask if I'd eaten. I clicked cancel on all 3. I did not send a 30-day notice. I did not send an email. I owed this family no professional courtesy. Professionals are paid. I had been a convenience, and conveniences do not get notice periods. The transfers stopped on a Monday. I know because by Wednesday my mother had called 7 times. I didn't listen to the voicemails for 2 days. When I finally did, they started confused and turned frightened and then turned angry in the space of 4 messages. The 5th one was my father. His voice was tight. "Nadia, the mortgage draft didn't process. Call your mother." The 6th was Connor. "Hey, my insurance lapsed? What happened to the payment?" Tone of mild inconvenience. The way someone sounds when the streaming service they didn't pay for stops working. No message said, "Are you okay?" No message said, "We're sorry about what happened." Every message arrived at the same destination. A $. I was sitting in the library on the island when I listened to those voicemails. I was wrapped in a wool blanket Theo had left on the reading chair. Walt had made coffee. Outside the window, the Atlantic was flat and gray and indifferent. The Terns were gone south for winter. The North Point was empty and clean. I put my phone face down on the desk. I did not call back. What I did instead was open my laptop and outline the new chapter of Meridian Structural Consulting. The island had strong satellite internet, installed by Theodore 3 years prior when his remote research collaborations required bandwidth. I had a desk. I had coffee. I had 4.3 acres of enforced solitude and no mortgage to fund for anyone else. I worked 12 hours a day for the next 2 weeks, and it felt like breathing for the first time. Meanwhile, the collapse in Harrow Falls unfolded the way financial collapses always do, predictably and to people who were entirely unprepared. My cousin Darla, Aunt Barbara's daughter, called me on a Thursday. She was the only person in the extended family I trusted unconditionally. She was an ER nurse in Baltimore, pragmatic and clear-eyed, who had watched the Merritt family dynamics for 30 years and described them once as a slow-motion house fire that everyone pretended was ambient lighting. She said, "Nadia, your mom called my mom last night. She's telling everyone you abandoned them. What's happening to the mortgage?" One payment missed, second one coming up in 3 weeks. Your dad's insurance lapsed. He's calling around. Connor's car apparently got flagged by the insurance company for a gap. Good. She laughed. Yeah. And Connor? Darla paused. He was asked to go back to work. She said it the way a doctor says a patient was advised to exercise. What was his response? She paused again. He said the commute to the warehouse is too long. I set my coffee down. Your mom is in denial, Darla continued. She keeps saying there's a mistake, that you're just upset and you'll fix it when you calm down. She doesn't understand that this is the fix. My father. What's he saying? Nothing. You know your father, he said. He sits on the porch, drinks his coffee, doesn't look at anyone. Darla also told me that my mother had been to the bank. She'd spoken to a mortgage advisor about options. The advisor had told her that with one income, part-time, no equity to draw, and no co-signer willing to step in, their options were limited. They could pursue a refinance if they could secure a co-signer, they could rent a portion of the house, or they could list it within the year before a delinquency hit the credit report. My mother had reportedly responded by asking the advisor if they could just call my bank directly. The advisor had explained that banks don't work that way. Darla also told me something I hadn't known. Connor had been paying himself $800 a month from a shared household expense account my mother had set up to manage the utilities. He called it his contribution to the house. He wasn't contributing to the house. He was charging the house for the service of living in it. I let that settle. $800 a month. My brother had been extracting money from the family account, the account I was supplementing, while simultaneously owning a car I'd paid for and a vehicle insurance policy I was subsidizing. He had been, in the most technical sense, financially mining me from a distance without my knowledge. I didn't feel rage. I want to be clear about that. I felt something more clarifying than rage. I felt the specific calm of a person who has just confirmed a suspicion they've been talking themselves out of for years. I thanked Darla. I asked her to keep me informed without putting herself in the middle. She said, "Girl, I have been in the middle since 1998. This is nothing new. Let me know if you need anything." 2 weeks later, my phone rang at 9 p.m. My mother. I answered because I'd decided to answer it exactly once in a calm place from a position of complete stillness. I was in the library. The fire was going. The ocean was dark outside the window. "Nadia?" "Mom, we need to talk about the house." "Okay." "The payment didn't go through again. We're going to get a late notice if this isn't fixed before the 15th. Her voice was controlled, careful. Not the voice she used when she was worried, the voice she used when she was managing. "I know. Did you cancel it?" "Yes." Silence. "Why?" She asked it the way you'd ask someone why they moved the furniture without telling you. Inconvenienced, not genuinely curious. "Because you asked me to leave, Mom. You gave my room to Connor, and when I drove away with my things in boxes, no one in that house called to ask if I was okay. Not that night, not the next morning, not in 3 weeks. Every call I received was about a payment." That's not fair, Joanna. We assumed you were fine. You're always, don't say I'm always fine. Her silence was different this time. Shorter, sharper, I continued. You've been receiving $2,014 a month from my account for years. When that stopped, you called within 48 hours. When your daughter moved out with nowhere to go, you waited 3 weeks and only called about money. I need you to sit with that. Nadia, the house is in your father's name. If we lose it, I know whose name it's in. I co-signed the loan. I've supplemented the payment for 8 years. I've documented all of it. Silence. Mom, I'm not calling the bank. I'm not resuming the transfers. I'm living my life. If you want to have a conversation that isn't about money, I'm here. But I won't be the reason your bills get paid anymore. That was never a reasonable arrangement, and I should have recognized it sooner. You have everything, Nadia. You have your career. You have your apartment. We have nothing without Mom. I stopped her. I have what I built. That's not the same as having everything. Good night. I hung up. The fire crackled. Outside, nothing. Just Atlantic November, cold and salt, and the sound of the water doing what water does. I felt clean, the same way I'd felt the first night I slept in room 114 of the Super 8. Not happy, clean. Let me tell you about the month of December. The family moved through a particular kind of chaos that is specific to people who have never had to solve a problem they weren't handed the solution to. My father picked up additional hours at the distribution center where he'd done contract work for 2 years. It wasn't enough, but it was movement. He also placed an ad on a neighborhood Facebook group for a room rental. A graduate student from Johns Hopkins named Priya responded within 6 hours and moved into the upstairs guest room by the 3rd week of December. My mother, Donna Merritt, hated this. She described it to Darla as an invasion of her home. Darla told her the alternative was a foreclosure notice, and my mother went quiet in the way she does when a fact arrives that she can't fold neatly. Connor remained in my old room. He had applied for 3 jobs as of mid-December, according to Darla, who tracked these developments with the clinical patience of a researcher. He'd applied to a sporting goods retailer, an online order fulfillment center, and a landscaping company. He'd heard back from the fulfillment center. He had an interview scheduled. I'm going to take a moment and tell you something I genuinely felt during that December on the island. The island was cold in winter. I want you to understand this clearly. Not romantic cold, not picturesque cold. Actual cold. The kind that comes off the Atlantic with deliberate weight. I wore layers in the house until the radiant floor system had been running for an hour. Walt knocked at 7 every morning to check whether I wanted a fire started in the library before he went to work on the dock. I always said yes. He always knocked anyway. That was the quality of the winter. Deliberate. Honest. I worked mornings on Meridian. 3 new consulting contracts signed before Christmas. I read Theodore's books in the afternoons. Marine biology, conservation biology, tide charts and oceanography texts. A few novels I wouldn't have expected from him. Edith Wharton, Patrick O'Brien. I ate dinner at the kitchen table alone, which sounds lonelier than it was. It was the first time in years that a meal existed for no reason other than to feed me. Nobody needed something from me before I finished it. At night, the island was silent in a way that city people don't experience. Not the absence of sound, which is its own kind of noise, but real silence. The sound of water moving and wind moving and nothing else. I sat on the porch some nights in a wool coat and watched the lights of distant vessels and felt the specific weight of having no one depending on me. It felt like setting down something I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped registering it as a weight. On December 23rd, something happened that I want to describe carefully because it changed the final arc. A writer for a Maine-based architecture and real estate magazine, Coastal Built, published an annual winter feature on privately owned island properties in the Gulf of Maine. The piece was a standard survey of the region's most significant private parcels, their histories, their current uses, their infrastructure. Theodore's Island had been featured once before, in 2011, with Theodore's permission, as part of a profile on self-sustaining residential design. The 2024 piece referenced the island again, briefly, as a transition note. A paragraph, maybe 80 words. It mentioned the 2011 profile, Theodore's passing, and noted that the property had recently transferred to private ownership to a family member, a structural engineer based on the East Coast. The magazine had 14,000 subscribers. Its digital edition was shared through a home design newsletter with an additional 90,000 readers. One of those 90,000 readers was a woman named Kathleen Morse, who attended the same church in Harrow Falls as my mother. Kathleen Morse forwarded the article to my mother on December 26th with the message, "Donna, is this Nadia? So exciting!" My mother read it at the kitchen table. Darla called me that afternoon. She said, "Nadia, brace yourself." I was on the porch with a cup of tea. The water was gray and the sky was the same color as the water, and the line between them was almost invisible. "She found out," I said. "Yeah, your mom read an article, something in a Maine magazine." "How did she react?" Darla paused the way she always does when the answer is long, but she's going to give it to me in one sentence. She said, "She went upstairs and didn't come down for an hour. Then she came down and told your father you owned an island." "What did he say?" "He asked if it was real. She said yes. He went out to the porch." "And Connor?" Darla said. "He looked up from his phone for the first time in weeks." The calls started on December 27th. My mother called twice, then Connor called, which was notable because in 4 years of receiving money from my account, he had never once initiated a phone call to me. Then my mother called again, then my father, which told me the situation had exceeded my mother's ability to manage it alone. I let all of them go to voicemail. I listened. My mother's first call. "Nadia, I don't understand. How do you have an island? How long have you had this? Why didn't you tell us?" My mother's second call. "Nadia, we're family. Whatever you're going through, we can talk about it. Call me back." Connor's call. "Hey, so I saw this thing online about a property in Maine. Is that real? I mean, that's pretty cool. Nadia, seriously. If you ever want company up there or whatever, I'm flexible. No pressure. Anyway, call me." My father's call was 12 seconds long. "Nadia, it's Dad. I need you to call me back. Please." I sat with the phone in both hands in the library for 20 minutes. Then I set it on the desk and went to make tea. What I found clarifying about that silence, about hearing those messages without emotion, was this. Not one of them began with, "I'm sorry we made you leave." Not one said, "We should have called." Not one of them contained the word wrong. What they contained was the architecture of approach. My mother was curious, then conciliatory, then strategic. Connor was performatively casual and operationally available. My father deployed please, which was the most he'd ever offered and the least he knew how to give. They had learned about the island. They had not learned anything about themselves. January arrived the way January does in Maine, white and relentless. Walt and I shoveled the dock path twice in the first week. I learned that the boathouse had a 21-foot fiberglass day cruiser Theodore had kept in working order, and that Walt could service its twin 90-horsepower engines himself. I learned the island had a specific wind pattern that made the eastern shore uncomfortable in January mornings and the western shore preferable by afternoon. I learned the library had a heating problem in the northwest corner where the insulation had thinned against the exterior wall, and I spent a weekend doing what I do, assessing the structural envelope, calculating the thermal bridge, ordering the materials from a mainland supplier, and fixing it myself over the course of 4 days. Walt watched me work on the second day and said, "Mr. Theodore would have hired someone for this." I said, "I know. I'm not Mr. Theodore." He said, "No, you're better with tools." On January 9th, I called Darla. I asked her a single question. "If you had to describe what my family thinks is going to happen next, what would you say?" She didn't hesitate. "Your mom thinks you'll soften. She thinks the island is leverage that she can convert into a family reunion if she plays it right. She's been telling Barbara that all you need is to feel included." Her exact words were, "Nadia just wants to feel like she belongs. She thinks if she invites you to come home, you'll bring them to the island as a gesture." "What does Connor think?" Darla said, "Connor thinks you owe him a vacation." I absorbed that. "What about my father?" She was quiet for a second. "Darla," I said. "Your dad," she said carefully, "has been sitting on the porch. In January, 40 degrees. Your mom went out twice to tell him to come in. He said he was thinking. I think he might actually know what he did." On January 15th, my mother called at 11 a.m. I answered. "Nadia." Her voice was warm, deliberate warmth, placed carefully, the way you'd set a fragile object on a shelf you weren't sure would hold. "Mom?" "I've been thinking, and I know this has all been very hard. I know you've been upset." She paused. "I know we should have handled the room situation differently." Should have handled differently. 11 words. My mother had workshopped those 11 words carefully. They acknowledged nothing and apologized for nothing while sounding like both. I let her continue. "We miss you. It's the holidays and we miss you. I was thinking if you want to invite the family up to Maine, to the island, we could have a real visit, a fresh start. Connor has been asking about it. Dad hasn't said much, but I know he'd like to come." She paused. "And if you wanted, we could make it a regular thing. Summer visits. You have that guest cottage, right?" The article mentioned the guest cottage. There it was, the architecture of the request, laid out cleanly, the way my mother always laid out requests she'd been planning for weeks. A visit, a fresh start, regular summers, the guest cottage. "Mom," I said, "do you remember what you said to me the night I stood in my bedroom doorway?" A pause. "Nadia." You said, "It's practical." You said I was flexible. You said I didn't have kids or a husband. You said Dad needed the room more than I did, except that you meant Connor. You said it in front of Aunt Barbara and Ted Polson, and not one person in that room said I was worth staying for. Nadia, we didn't mean... And then Dad packed my things. My graduation picture was already on the floor, Mom. He'd already moved it before I got upstairs. You had decided before I walked in the door. Her voice shifted. I was trying to do what was best for the family. I'm the family too. Silence. I don't have a guest cottage available for visits. I'm not extending invitations. What I have is a home that I earned from a man who watched me work for 12 years from a distance and concluded I was worth leaving everything to. That is not a vacation destination for the people who packed me in a cardboard box. Nadia, I'm not done. You called me 2 days after the mortgage payment stopped. You have never once in a phone call started with, "How are you?" You started with the money. You always start with the money. I am not the money. I was your daughter, and you treated me like a utility. Her voice cracked. I heard it happen. Not the performed crack, the real one, the small one, the one that sounds like a floorboard giving slightly. She said, I know I wasn't fair to you. 4 words. I let them sit. Then I said, I know, and I hope that means something to you. But it doesn't change what I'm able to offer right now. I need space and time. If you'd like to rebuild a real relationship, one that isn't about what I can provide, I'm open to that eventually. But it starts from 0. No money, no island, no guest cottage. Just 2 people choosing to be honest. Are you willing to do that? She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I think so. I said, then call me sometime when you don't need anything. Just to talk. I'll answer. We hung up. I walked to the east porch and sat in the cold for 20 minutes. The water was flat. A cormorant sat on the dock piling and stared at the horizon with the specific patience of something that has never questioned what it was doing here. I understood the feeling. Connor called that afternoon. He'd waited, which told me my mother had briefed him on the call. He opened with, Hey, Nadia, so I heard you talked to Mom. His voice was bright in the way it gets when he's been instructed to be warm. I know things have been rough. I just want you to know, no hard feelings on my end. I thought it'd be good if we started fresh. He paused. And if you ever want to have people out to the island, I'm around. I could bring a couple friends. I'm pretty good on boats. I can help with stuff. I let the sentence finish. Then I said, Connor, I want to ask you something directly. Yeah, sure. When I drove away from Caldwell Road in October, what did you do? What do you mean? That night, I had my things in boxes. I left. What did you do after that? A pause. I went back upstairs. To your new room? My room. Nadia, Mom said, Connor. I said his name once, flat and even. You are 28 years old. You had been living in that house for 6 years without paying rent. I paid for your car. I paid for your insurance. I co-supplemented the mortgage that gives you a roof. And when I left, you went upstairs to the room you'd been moved into before I even knew I was leaving. You didn't call. You didn't come outside. You didn't say a single word as I walked past you with a box under my arm. The silence on his end was different from my mother's. Hers had weight. His had blankness. Yeah, he said. I mean, I didn't think about it like that. I know you didn't. That's actually the problem. So what does that mean? It means I love you because you're my brother. It means I'm not sending money anymore. And it means I'm not extending invitations to the island. If you want to have a relationship with me, call me when you have something to say. Something real. He didn't say anything for 4 seconds. Then he said, "Okay." I said, "Good. Get the job at the fulfillment center." "How did you know about that?" "I have my sources. Go. It's a start." He didn't laugh, but he didn't hang up either. We stayed on the line in silence for another 10 seconds, which sounds odd, but felt like something. Like the space where something might eventually grow. Then I said, "Good night, Connor." He said, "Night." In March, with the Maine mud season turning the dock path soft and the turns returning to the North Point just as Theodore's note had said they would, I sat at his desk in the library with a new project proposal open on my laptop. A regional ferry terminal in mid-coast Maine had issued an RFP for a structural assessment and dock reinforcement plan. Meridian Structural Consulting submitted a bid. We won the contract on a Wednesday afternoon. I called Darla. We'd won a public contract. She said, "That's my girl." I called David Voss to update the estate's contact information and finalize the last documentation transfer. He asked how the island was treating me. I told him the northwest corner of the library had needed re-insulation and that I'd fixed it myself. He said Theodore would have liked that. I told him Theodore would have supervised from the doorway with a cup of coffee and an opinion about the R value. Mr. Voss laughed. He said that was the most accurate description of Theodore Merritt he'd ever heard. I called Walt after that to ask about spring maintenance on the day cruiser. He said the port engine would need new injectors before anything long range. I said order them. He said he already had. Then I called my father. He answered on the second ring. "Nadia, Dad." He was quiet for a moment. "Where are you?" "On the island, in the library." Another pause. "Is it nice?" "It is. It's cold in March, but it's mine." His breath was audible. He exhaled slowly. I heard a bird somewhere on his end, probably the backyard. His tomato seedlings would be starting on the windowsill by now. He never planted before mid-April, but he always started the seeds in March. "I'm sorry, Nadia." He said it without preamble, without qualification, without a but attached to the end. "I'm sorry for that night. I should have said no to your mother. I should have looked you in the eye. I should have asked where you were going. I should have asked 100 things I didn't ask." "I know, Dad. Your mother is trying. She's not doing it perfectly, but she's trying." "I know that too." He said, "What do you need from me?" "Honesty. Just honesty, that's all." He said, "That I can do. It might be slow. Slow is fine. I'm not going anywhere." That cracked me in the specific way only a father's voice can, and I let it. We talked for 40 minutes about his tomato seedlings, about the PBS documentary he'd watched on the Gulf of Maine fishing industry, about the way the light was in the late afternoon on the Caldwell Road porch, about nothing important and everything important, the way good conversations go when two people stop bracing and just talk. Before we hung up, he said, "I'd like to see it someday. The island. Not to visit, just to see what you built." I said, "You didn't build it. Uncle Theo did." He said, "No, I mean what you became in it." I held the phone for a second after he said that. Then I said, "Come in August, when the turns are gone and the weather is clear. Just you and me. No agenda." He said, "Okay." I said, "Bring the seed catalog. We'll talk about what grows in salt air." He laughed. It was the first time I'd heard my father laugh in a year. It sounded like something coming back. Here is where I want to pause before I take you to the end. I've been telling you this story from the Island Library, from Theodore's desk, surrounded by his books and his tide charts and his note about the turns. And the thing I keep returning to is a question I asked myself the night I sat in that motel room and first read the letter. I asked, why me? Why did a man who'd barely spent time with me, who'd met me twice and sent a card, and followed my career through magazine clippings in a folder, why did he choose me? I think I know now. He chose me because I kept going. Not because I had no burdens. He could see from the outside that I had plenty. He chose me because I kept building anyway. In the margins, in the evenings, in the silence that my family never thought to fill with questions about my life. He chose me because I had, as he put it, discipline in my spine. But I want to say something else. I want to say it carefully. The discipline didn't save me. The island didn't save me. What saved me was the night I drove away from Caldwell Road without turning around. Not because leaving was easy, because it was the first true thing I'd done for myself in 11 years. I want to talk to you directly for a moment. If you are the person in your family who pays the bills nobody acknowledges, if you are the one whose bedroom gets reassigned and whose graduation photo gets moved to the floor, if you are the one who built something in the silence because nobody thought to ask what you were doing in the evenings, this is for you. The money you've given is real. The time is real. The sacrifice is documented even if you never wrote it down. And the people who benefited from it may never understand the magnitude of what you gave, because that's the nature of receiving something freely given. It begins to feel like weather, inevitable, impersonal, not connected to a person. You don't need an island. You don't need a trust or a deed or a grandparent who kept a folder of your clippings. You need to stop. Stop paying for people who don't ask how you are. Stop subsidizing lives that have no curiosity about yours. Stop funding a version of yourself that exists only as a resource. And if stopping terrifies you, because you've been told your whole life that helping is the same as belonging, I need you to hear this. You were worth belonging before you ever wrote a single check. My name is Nadia Elaine Merritt. I'm 34 years old. I run a structural consulting firm out of a cedar-shingled house on 4.3 acres of Atlantic Maine, and I built it the way I built everything. Slowly, precisely, in the margins, and in full view of nobody who mattered until it was too late for them to claim a piece of it. My mother and I speak on the phone once a month. She doesn't always ask the right questions, but she asks more than she used to, and I take that as a first course correction in a long project. My father and I talk every 2 weeks. We talk about weather, about engineering, about what grows in salt air. He's coming in August. I have a dock and a library and a man named Walt who makes a decent pot of chowder. Connor got the fulfillment center job. He's been there since February. He hasn't quit. He hasn't called asking for money. 2 weeks ago, he sent me a photo of a plant he bought for his apartment. Just a small succulent in a clay pot. No caption. I saved it. Aunt Barbara's opinion never mattered to me and still doesn't, but she sent a Christmas card this year. It said, "Proud of you, Nadia." 3 words. From a woman who sat on a bar stool and looked at the tile grout. It was more than I expected, and less than she owed me. So we'll call it square. Theodore Rowan Merritt, the man who chose me, spent the last 19 years of his life doing exactly what he wanted. On water, in silence, surrounded by books and tides, and a man named Walt who knew where everything was. He made one decision late in life that he never explained to anyone. Not to my grandmother, not to the family, not to anyone except his attorney. He left it all to the one who kept building. I think about that every morning when I sit at his desk and look at the water and watch the light change across the tide line and put my hands on the work in front of me. Every morning the desk is solid. Every morning the work is mine. Every morning the silence means exactly what I want it to mean. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If this story reached something in you, something you've been carrying quietly, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Tell me if you've ever been the one holding everything together. Tell me if you've ever stopped. Tell me if you're thinking about stopping right now. And if you know someone who needs to hear that their worth is not the sum of what they pay for others, please share this with them today. I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. Take care of yourself first. Nobody else holds that key.